Something changed in Megyn Kelly. The intellectual dishonesty and the absolute destruction of her show is rather sad. As someone who actually got my start on Megyn Kelly's show, I was featured on her show in 2014, I believe, when I on her CLE was disinvited from Brandeis. After that, I always had great respect for her and was checking out her program back when it was on Fox and thought she was a brave truth teller. And now we see that whatever has happened to her in this online space is rather rotten. And nothing showed this more than the way in which she engaged in discussion about the issue of Buckley Carlson and JD Vance that happened in the last few days. Sloan Rackmuth, who was on my podcast a few days ago, actually has been going back and forth with Buckley Carlson, Tucker's brother. And he is an open anti-Semite, promoting all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories, and yesterday likening Israel's pager attack against Hezbollah to the 9/11 hijackers using box cutters. So you can understand the moral perversion that's at play here with Tucker Carlson's brother named Buckley. Now, Tucker Carlson also has a son named Buckley who works for JD Vance. This has been covered by Newsweek, ABC. When he first got the job, he used to work for Governor Jim Banks of Indiana, our senator. I don't know anything about Buckley the kid. I would not have sent the tweet that Sloan sent. But Sloan sent one tweet in which she asked if Buckley Carlson, the son, had any of these bigoted tendencies that his father and uncle share, and asked it as a question, did not state it as fact. Now, I would not have done that myself. I told Sloan that. But then the vice president of the United States of America jumped on Twitter and sent out 3 separate messages attacking Sloan. So that's where, to me, it got a little bit weird, because it's one thing to say you're going to stand up for a staffer if, say, CNN or Fox or even someone like Megyn Kelly were to say something. That's fine. I can understand where that's coming from. But it's weird to me that the vice president of the United States speaks up against someone on X with 47,000 followers. And probably what's equally weird to me is that someone who considers himself a journalist, Megyn Kelly, would then talk about the issue in such a way. So here's a clip from yesterday with Megyn Kelly and Emily Jashinsky. I'm going to do some commentary here as I roll the tape.
We talked also with Glenn yesterday about how JD Vance is now getting attacked. Of course, he's going to be even worse than Trump. Trump, was he really a racist? But JD Vance is definitely a racist. He's an anti-Semite.
Okay, so just from the start, the left invoking all sorts of crazy things against Donald Trump is not the same as people on the right side of the aisle raising issue with the fact that one of JD Vance's closest friends and political allies is Tucker Carlson, who has spent the better part of the last 18 months promoting anti-conservative, bigoted ideas on his podcast, using the guests as an excuse to launder these rather heinous and vicious attacks against the conservative movement, against America. And he also brings up Israel and the Jews. But that's part of Tucker's gaslighting. It really has nothing to do with Israel or the Jews. It has to do with the fact that he's promoting fundamentally anti-conservative ideas, and people are bringing this up and asking a question about how that is acceptable in the conservative movement, or is that actually conservative? Hint, it's not. But Megyn right here is saying that if you have any objection to anti-conservative ideas being laundered into the conservative movement, you are like Black Lives Matter activists or radical leftists who oppose Trump.
He's associated with Tucker Carlson, who everybody knows is an anti-Semite and a Nazi. Mark Levin told me so.
She's taking words from one commentator, and I respect Mark Levin, but I don't agree with him calling Tucker Carlson a Nazi. But I That's one commentator. Again, she's reducing the entire argument to one commentator. So that's the equivalent if we were to take every argument that Megyn Kelly has ever made and reduce it to the most extreme person she's had on her show. So she's had Anna Kasparian on her show. So we should now reduce the entirety of every argument that's been made on Megyn Kelly's show to Anna Kasparian. It doesn't work like that. Megyn knows this.
And they're trying to like wrap that around JD Vance now because they're friends and he hasn't condemned Tucker. You're a long time waiting. He's never going to condemn Tucker. I hate to disappoint Tucker's critics. Mark my words, JD Vance will never condemn him because he's not a dick. He is going to stick by his friend. And I don't think JD.
It's interesting because, for example, if Tucker came out tomorrow for trans ideology, I'm highly confident that JD Vance would say, this is not someone I can associate with. Why is it when he promotes radical conspiracy theories and pumps up Maduro of Venezuela that all of a sudden he can't do anything? That's a very fair question. And of course, Megyn Kelly's not going to accurately and fairly portray the situation.
Vance thinks that Tucker is an anti-Semite or believes any of the things that people are saying about him. And he's not going to say something he doesn't believe.
It's not really what people are saying about him. Tucker's has his own show that was actually sponsored in part by Heritage Foundation and Hillsdale College. So most of what's being said is actually just quoting Tucker or the people on his show. He just had a softball dinner date with Nick Fuentes in which he basically asked no tough questions. So again, it's the peak of intellectual dishonesty what Megyn Kelly is doing here.
Okay. But he is standing up, like he's actively standing up for Tucker's son, Buckley Carlson. Now, there are two Buckley Carlsons. Tucker has a brother named Buckley, who I think is 2 years younger than he is. And then Tucker named his son Buckley. And that son is working for JD Vance in the comms shop. And because he's Tucker's son, he's now getting all this pressure on him. He's getting labeled like a bigot. It's crazy.
No, he was not. So right there, that's lie number one. We should actually just keep tabs on how many lies Megyn Kelly tells in the retelling of this story. Again, I'm just going to quote here, actually. Sloan said, "Today we learned that Tucker Carlson's brother idolizes Nick Fuentes. Racism and anti-Semitism is a Carlson family trait." And again, I would not have sent this tweet, but let's just call what Sloan did for what it is. Is Tucker's son Buckley, who serves as JD Vance's top aide, also a vile bigot? America deserves to know how deep the Carlson's family ethnic and religious hatred runs. That's what Sloan Rackmuth tweeted.
Crazy, the attacks on Buckley Carlson, which are totally unjustified, and they've just decided to pick on him and pretend he's got positions that he doesn't have, and demand.
Also, who's they? Laura Loomer had speculated that Buckley Carlson was involved in leaking. The vice president didn't respond to that. I've seen a few random X accounts that said something, and then Sloan Rackmuth put out one tweet. One. So who is they?
And that, like, someone speak out about it. It's like, what? So I'll give you an example. There is someone who calls herself a journalist who goes by Sloan Rackmuth. And she has decided to, according to JD Vance, he posted this, obsessively attack a staffer in his 20s in JD's office. He's talking about Buckley Carlson.
It's funny because this is someone who calls herself a journalist, yet can't actually investigate if anything that the vice president said was true. We don't nearly need to go back to the archives to know that every single thing that Kamala Harris or Joe Biden said, Megyn Kelly literally made a show about fact-checking them.
Carlson, because JD goes on, she does not like the views of his father. JD goes on to write, every time I see a public attack on Buckley, it's a complete lie. And yes, I notice every person with an agenda who unfairly attacks a good guy who does a great job for me. Then,
who is every person? Is he referring to Laura Loomer and Sloan Rackmuth? I have no idea who every person is because there's one tweet that he responded to.
And this podcast host, Daniel Mail, responds with,
"Look, Ma, I made it."
Mr. Vice President, Sloan Rackmuth asked if Buckley Carlson, your employee, shares the same affinity for bigotry that his father does. How should we interpret your answer?
Now, the Megyn Kelly of old would have invited me or Sloan onto her show to actually talk about this. If she would have asked me, Daniel, what did you mean by that? I would have said that I found it extremely bizarre that the Vice President of the United States responded to a random person on X with 47,000 followers so forcefully. As you'll see, there's 3 different tweets. So I stood up for Sloan, asking the Vice President that now that you're here in the conversation on X, what do you actually have to say about the heart of the issue, which really has to do with Tucker? That's a fair question for the Vice President of the United States. I would not have asked that question if the Vice President of the United States had not jumped into X.
This woman, Sloan Rackmuth, has been really going after Buckley Carlson.
Another lie. This is one tweet.
As if he's the sitting vice president.
Megyn calls herself a journalist and is mocking Sloan as a journalist. Is Megyn incapable of simply searching on X and seeing what is going on? Going after Buckley Carlson as if he's the sitting vice president of the United States? No, she is not. She sent one tweet and the vice president sent 3 tweets in response.
Very untoward and nasty. And JD goes on. This Sloan describes herself as a defender of Judeo-Christian values. Is it a Judeo-Christian value to lie about someone you don't know?
I have to disagree with the vice president here. What lie did Sloan tell? Again, you can say, keep the child out of it. It was wrong for Tucker Carlson to attack Mark Levin's stepson, David Milstein. It's wrong to bring up Buckley Carlson. If that's your position, and that's fair. What did she do that would indicate that it's an obsessive attack against Buckley Carlson?
Not in any church I ever spent time in. And then
also, I have to imagine that the Vice President of the United States knew that Sloan is Jewish. It's interesting to say that not in any church that I ever stepped foot in. I'll leave it there.
And goes on to post this. I have an extraordinary tolerance for disagreements and criticisms from the various people in our coalition, but I'm a very loyal person and I have zero tolerance for scumbags attacking my staff. And yes, everyone who I've seen attack Buckley with lies is a scumbag. So good for him. He's amazing.
It's amazing. The Vice President of the United States spent his Sunday afternoon sending 3 tweets against someone on X.
Taking on these online smear campaigns, you could argue it's beneath the dignity. I don't think so at all. I think it restores the dignity of the vice president's office.
So Megyn Kelly thinks that misrepresenting what happened and sending 3 messages about 3 tweets about Buckley Carlson going after Sloan Rackmuth restores the dignity of the office of the Vice President of the United States. Think about that for a second. It's one thing if JD actually addressed it honestly and accurately. I'm not even really upset about that part. He clearly has a lot going on. He's the Vice President of the United States. But he didn't even address the issue correctly. It was not an obsessive attack. It was one dumb tweet that I wouldn't have sent, and I don't think Sloan would have sent in retrospect. I'm not sure. I can't speak for her, but just unbelievable the mental gymnastics that Megyn Kelly is going here. And again, it just shows that she's eviscerated any sort of credibility.
He's a young vice president. He knows that online does matter in some circles and it can drive narratives about people. And this is a totally innocent young man who's done nothing other than be born to someone the left hates. So good.
Born to someone the left hates. See, this is where Megyn Kelly would have actually, if she was still a journalist, would have looked into it and said, oh, I quoted 2 people, or even I just quoted Sloan. What does Sloan believe? But instead, she's framing this as a left against right issue when it's actually conservatives that are raising more of the problem. Don't strawman us with some random editorial page article from the New York Times. There's conservatives that are asking real, authentic questions, but Megyn can't handle that.
For the vice president for saying, you keep coming at me, you're going to hear from me.
And by the way, Buckley Carlson, he used to work for Jim Banks. He is being confused for his uncle, who has some fiery social media posts. But if you consider yourself a journalist, as the Sloan Rackmuth and others do, they immediately, it appeared a lot of people immediately conflated or confused his uncle for him, which is a very easy thing not to do. It just takes a little bit of Googling before you publish.
Wouldn't it take just a little bit of Googling to see what actually happened, not just what the vice president said happened?
Post and a little bit of verification before you post, if you say you're acting in a journalistic capacity. And nobody here in DC.
By the way, Emily, also because if you look up Buckley Carlson, the brother, his ex bio is like loving father, right, husband, the brother, clearly Buckley Carlson, the younger.
Buckley Carlson's like 28. You could very easily be a loving father, brother, husband. It's sad to see what Megyn has become.
Is all but a kid. He's in his young 20s. He just got out of college. Like he almost certainly would not have the description that the older Buckley Carlson has. It wouldn't take much to figure out there are two people by that name.
Right. And Buckley, the younger Buckley, worked for Jim Banks for a while. He's been in DC, and nobody in conservative circles in DC has a bad word to say about Buckley Carlson. Everybody likes Buckley Carlson, who works for JD. In fact, that's how you end up working for the vice president, is that people think you're a good guy and they slot you into that role. So it's just completely ridiculous. And I think part of the reason Vice President Vance has stepped into the mix here is that he recognizes what this is actually about and is nipping it in the bud, because he recognizes that for years to come, as you said, Megyn, there's going to be a guilt by association drumbeat of attacks on Vice President Vance because of his relationship with Tucker Carlson. And
it's not a guilt by association as if they don't know each other or they met for coffee once. It's a guilt by association because JD Vance considers Tucker Carlson to be one of his closest friends and political advisors, and Tucker Carlson is a bigot. So I think it's a problem when the vice president of the United States has a very close advisor who's an open bigot and promotes insane conspiracy theories at the expense of minority communities in America. That's a problem. So spare me this, oh my God, guilt by association. Going after the son who has said nothing is different. Asking JD Vance why one of his closest political advisors has gone nuts and is laundering the likes of Daryl Cooper and Jeffrey Sachs is a very fair and honest question.
That's what this is actually about at the end of the day.
So then we get Dave Rubin responding to JD Vance.
I'm not going to go into all the Dave Rubin part here, but it just has to be said, Megyn has lost it. Any sort of claim to be a journalist is clearly not there. It's performative, and it's sad because so many Americans, especially on the right, really did respect her and admire her, and she has thrown that down the toilet, seemingly for friendship with Tucker Carlson.